You are listening to the Intelligent Racer Podcast, where we look to educate and entertain the endurance racing community through discussions with racing professionals and elite age groupers.
In today's episode of the podcast, I speak with Rick Alexander. Rick is a military veteran, ultrarunner, podcaster, author, and entrepreneur. We talk about his philosophy on how to approach life from a movement, nutrition, sleep, and supplements perspective. He recently wrote a book about it called Burn Your Couch. I hope you enjoy. Rick, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
So why don't we just start off with learning a little bit about your background?
Yeah, for sure. I think I probably took a path that maybe no other endurance athlete has taken. But as far as athletically, I mean, I played sports in high school. I was always active. I raced mountain bikes when I was a kid, up until I raced junior pro up until like 18 years old or 17 years old. And then after high school, I joined the military. I did pick a job in the military that was rather strenuous. It was there was a selection process for my job. And I spent about 10 years in the military. And through that, I kind of experimented with all kinds of different things. I was a strongman athlete for a while. I competed in strongman for 2 years, CrossFit. And then on a whim, I signed up for a 100-miler. It did not go well. I didn't finish. I got pulled at mile 70. Basically at 5'9", 238 pounds. I was not ready to run 100 miles in the mountains of Santa Barbara. And then, but I liked the idea of the challenge, and I kind of got hooked from there. And that kind of started me down this path of endurance.
Right. And then, so moving forward in your endurance racing career, you ultimately, in 2017 have taken on the Tahoe 200, which is, 200-mile race around Lake Tahoe. Just talk about that. I mean, how did the progression go for you? I mean, you went from a DNF and a 100-miler and then worked your way up to doing arguably, one of the hardest races in North America, and you obviously successfully completed it.
I definitely don't take failure well, for better or worse. But after I got pulled from that 100-miler, there's probably 3 days where I really couldn't walk at all. And I was kind of just laid up in bed, and I had a lot of time to think about this big failure that I just kind of shouldered. And it was one of the first really kind of big failures of my life, because I kind of told people you put it out on social media and your family and everybody's following you.
Yeah.
So it was a real inflection point. And within 5 days of not finishing that race, I actually signed up for Tahoe, because I was like, what would be the best way for me to come back and prove that I'm capable of doing this? And so for me, in my head, that was sign up for Tahoe. And of course, then I decided obviously you're not going to get through something as strenuous as Tahoe without training for it. So then I decided okay, I got to train for this and kind of build a whole year programmed out just for this race.
Right. And so what was your training like? I mean, how did you structure it? So like you said, you had about a year to do it. So how did you kind of ramp up and focus on this race?
I did two things. So I definitely relied on my ability to lift weights still. I think that's something that maybe a lot of endurance athletes kind of miss the boat on.
Right.
Because I think, especially when it comes to ultra marathoning, if some people can handle really high mileage weeks, week in, week out. I'm not one of those people. So I kind of had to use my intelligence and kind of, racer IQ to figure out how I could inch that mileage down. So one of the ways I did that was with lifting. And I continued to lift 2 days a week, a lot of bilateral work. And we can kind of get into that if you want. And the other thing I did is just to keep myself honest is I signed up for a lot of B races. So I ran a lot of 50Ks and 50 milers just to ensure that I would get the mileage that I had to. And that worked out well for me. I mean, a lot of people think I had a big year because I ran 10 ultras this year and then maybe 2 marathons, I think. But for me, it was people are getting that much mileage in training. It's just for me, I knew if I signed up for these races, it would kind of hold my feet to the fire.
Right.
Because the last thing I wanted to do was show up in Tahoe unprepared.
Yeah. And so what does your weekly mileage kind of look like? I mean, so obviously there's a wide range of weekly mileages all the way up to, 100 plus. And obviously you said you kind of did it with races on weekends, but on average, I mean, you said you're sort of lower mileage and focused on strength training and cross training, things like that. Just give me a sense of, what do you think the average mileage was on a weekly basis?
So the way that I do it is I step it up. I would start at 30 miles a week, and I would literally step up 10 miles for 3 weeks. Then I would use 1 week as a regeneration, only 10, 15 miles, some cross training. And then I would do it again. So I peaked out around 80 miles. But I think what made me more successful than even doing that many miles in a week was kind of how I structured the training. And so one thing that I looked to do is I would sign up for a 50K, let's say on a Saturday, and then I would sign up for another 50K on a Sunday. Or one of the most beneficial days I had is I had a 50K in the morning and then another 50K that evening that went through the night. I think just as far as like dealing with sleep deprivation and time on your feet, when it comes to something as long as a 200 miler, that's probably the best way you could prepare for it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's always in the back of my mind, the time on the feet thing is like, how do you train for something that's 200 miles? I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I've talked to obviously a lot of folks who've done it, and I'm just trying to pick everyone's brain. And that's a good approach, which is, the back-to-back long runs or ideally in race conditions. So, obviously, so you have some support out there, and you also, like, I guess doing the one overnight helped you with the sleep deprivation simulation.
Yep. And I did that a lot. I think not enough people, especially ultra runners, train at night. And then when night does fall, everybody's pace slows so much because you just inherently use a lot more energy trying to run on the trails. And you don't realize it at the time until the next morning comes and you really feel smoked from the night. And so I did try to get a lot of training in at night just to be a little more efficient with my movement.
Right. And then from a hill perspective, obviously Tahoe has a lot of elevation gain and loss. I mean, did you do anything specific either in the strength training component or in your training in terms of getting used to going up those, mountainous ups and downs?
Yeah, that was difficult because I live in Virginia Beach, so it's completely flat here. There's no way to really train hills at all. We have one hill that's about 65 feet, and sometimes I would set my watch for 4 or 5 hours, and I would just slog up and down this 50-foot hill for hours. You work with what you have. Another thing I would do is I would try to I'd put my gym in the middle of a long run. So maybe I'd run 10 miles and then I'd get the gym, do like maybe 150 wall balls that would really tire my legs out. And then I would do another 10 miles on tired legs. That seemed to work pretty well. And other than that, when I could travel, I tried to get in the mountains, but that was definitely the most difficult part. Tahoe was 80,000 feet of elevation gain and loss. And it's anywhere from 5,500 feet up to, I think, 9,600 feet. So I actually got high altitude pulmonary edema within the second day. And so dealing with the altitude and the elevation was definitely the hardest part for me.
Right. Yeah. I live in New York City, and yeah, we have some hills here, but I often look at, I kind of look at these small kind of inclines and say, how many times would I have to do that to put in a really good climbing workout? So you did a 60-foot hill and repeated it for 5 hours. That's sort of what I'm looking at over here. And I often think about the monotony of it, but hey, you got to do what you got to do, right?
Yeah. And although it is monotonous, I think that there's something to be said for the mental toughness aspect of that too.
Oh yeah.
When you're just grinding it out, it doesn't even feel like there's end in sight. You can't even count how many times you go up and down this thing. So I think it helps when you're kind of feeling hopeless in the mountains. You
right.
got 170 miles to go.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about your book, Burn Your Couch, and just sort of your overall philosophy that you're trying to kind of, communicate out to people, which is, at least from my understanding is, there's too much focus on short-term comfort out there. And obviously in your title, Burn Your Couch, but can you just talk about that a little bit? Because I agree. The society is now built around all kinds of comforts, and we very, very rarely, unless we force ourselves to get into that uncomfortable, stressful situation. And so doing races or doing other kind of things is a good way to get at it, I would assume.
Yeah. For me, so I kind of, I wrote a book because just the reason that most people write a book, which you feel like you have to, like the words are coming out anyway.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with what you're saying. I think most people in general mistake being comfortable for being happy. And over the long term, we lose a little bit of ourselves every time we compromise for normal or for comfortable. And although it might feel good in the short term, I think long-term happiness and long-term fulfillment definitely suffers. I used to be stationed in Coronado, and I lived downtown San Diego. And my office on my side business was like 10 miles in the complete opposite, or 13 miles in the complete opposite direction through the hills. And when business got good, of course, your workouts, anyone that's run a business knows when it gets good, it's hard to maintain a healthy lifestyle while you run your business.
Yeah.
And so for me, although business was good, I bought a Mercedes. For me, that was a big thing at the time. It was like, okay, I feel like I'm making money now. especially from where I came from. It felt like a good move. It's the most comfortable car I'd owned up to that point.
Yeah.
And one day I decided that I would run to my office because I got out of work early. We had our weekly sales meeting. And so I was like, I wonder what happens if I run to my office. And this was maybe this was one of the only runs I did before the 100-miler. And so I was like, I'll give it a shot. And it was not easy. Obviously, I weighed a lot of weight. I didn't run. I get to the office after, it might have been the slowest half marathon in history. I think it took me like 2.5, 3 hours to get there. And I'm filled with grime from the road, and I'm trying to massage my muscles out. And I just have this smile on my face. I'm just like, so I guess content, just feeling like I earned this sales meeting. It's hard to describe what it is.
Yeah.
And anybody that's made power, under their own movement can attest to this feeling, the dopamine and everything that you get released, the serotonin. And I'm sitting there, and it just kind of dawned on me, like, the most comfortable thing that I've ever owned in my life is parked in my garage. Like, I didn't even use it today. So it was like at that moment, I kind of realized like how skewed we feel like just because we make these choices that are going to make us comfortable, they're going to make us happy. And unfortunately, it just doesn't always play out that way.
Yeah, it seems like a trap that's so easy to fall into, and I feel like so many people do it, especially nowadays with everything wired into smart devices, and you can get everything you want from the touch of a button at home. It's so easy to fall into that trap, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You think about the technological revolution that we're in now, this race towards singularity and AI. All these entrepreneurs are creating things that are making our lives easier, and that's why they're doing so well. But I think as a consumer, if you just kind of gobble all of that up with reckless abandon, you might end up in a place that's not so favorable. I'm interested in evolutionary biology. I know some people are, some people aren't, but if you are interested in that perspective and you take a look at it, think about something like eating food. This used to be, in our evolution, something that was literally life or death, right?
Yeah.
When you went out to hunt, it was literally life or death. And now that exact same activity can be done from an app on your smartphone. So where does that leave us as a society? It's like,
yeah,
I think some part of us is still kind of yearning for, the things that got us to where we are today.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I have the same exact philosophy, and I think about things, where do we come from? Hunter-gatherers and caves and things like that. And then I look at what we have today, and I'm like, this is not what we were designed at that DNA, biological level. But one good thing I would say is the technology, although it makes things easier, it also gives us more time to do other things. So I'm thinking that's sort of kind of how you would recommend people approach this, which is, you've got these comforts that can make, you're more productive in life, that then give you extra time to go and do things that might create some, controlled adversity in your life. Would you agree?
Yeah, completely. And I actually talk about kind of the evolution of purpose in my book, because this is something that I'm actually very interested in, because I think the answer is not to try to go back to the cave days, right? That's stupid. The answer is to utilize these things with the information that we have in order to be as happy as we can. I just think the answer is not to kind of gobble them up, like I said, with reckless abandon. But to your point, the survival used to inherently carry purpose, because if you look through evolution, we were literally trying to survive as a species. So the act of surviving had its own purpose and fulfillment. And now what's interesting is if you look at a society's, like, let's say, wealth rate and the amount of the economy, it basically tracks alongside the depression rate, which is super interesting. And I think that's because now, as people, the act of surviving no longer carries any inherent purpose.
Right.
But because of where we're at, you're kind of freed up to go look for a more meaningful purpose. Like, there's a lot of nonprofits. It depends what you're doing or what you're interested in. But I think we're at a really cool time, but you have to step back and recognize where we're at in order to take advantage of it.
Right. No, that makes complete sense. So, looking at someone, so obviously on this particular podcast, I have a lot of ultra marathoners, triathletes, other ultra marathon swimmers, kind of the extreme end of the spectrum. But we also have listeners and I have friends and family that also just, are in this state of want to get, on this pathway to what you're recommending. So for someone who's just starting out, how would you approach this? How would you introduce this adversity into their lives? They're not going to go and sign up for Tahoe immediately, but how do you kind of guide people?
Yeah, so I'm actually a really big proponent in the bucket list. I think because, generally we save the bucket list for something that we think would be awesome to do, but deep down we know we're never actually going to do. And the 100 miler for me was actually on my bucket list, which was the first reason that I signed up. And I think if people start, dusting off something like a bucket list, that I guarantee everybody out there has that one thing they've always wanted to do. And if you start moving in that direction, you're going to realize two things. One thing, you're going to realize there's a lot of stuff you don't like. Like for me, I thought growing up, just like a lot of kids, I wanted to be a rock star. I played in a band and we played bars all over the place. And I'm like, I don't want to do this. And you get to take it off the list and you realize, okay, that's not something that resonates with me.
Yeah.
But the other thing that happens is as you move toward these things that these like so-called bucket list items, you start realizing there's something there that does resonate with me, and you can start moving in that direction. And when you're moving, kind of aligned with your true purpose. And if you don't think you know that, it's because you probably haven't found it yet. Because that was the thing for me in the 100 miler.
Right. And so, so I guess in cases where, you have something on your bucket list that seems completely, out there and not achievable, it's sort of like if you can create a roadmap to get there. And, maybe, like you said, maybe it takes some intermediate steps or something. But ultimately, if you have that focal point, it'll help drive you, I'd assume.
Yeah, for sure. Have you read my book?
I have not, but I know your philosophy and I 100% agree with it.
Okay. Yeah, there's a chapter in the book called The Bucket List Blueprint that kind of talks about how you can kind of take these seemingly insurmountable goals and start breaking them down into smaller steps. But I think the first point is just finding the barrier to entry. I call it a low risk probe in the book. If you might want to run a 100 miler, depending on your fitness level, a 5K might literally be your lowest barrier of entry, something where you can test the waters. If you want to be a rock star playing in your local open mic night, that would be your barrier to entry, your low risk probe. And so you just kind of got to figure out like what is the minimum investment, both time and money, that I could give to actually try these activities that I think I might be interested in. And you'll know if you like it.
Yeah. So just, let's talk a little bit more broadly now. So, beyond just sort of taking that bucket list and focusing on sort of doing something that creates some adversity or some sort of discomfort. I mean, what else encompasses like a healthy lifestyle? I mean, it's more than just a physical activity or something. I mean, what are your stances on things like nutrition or I don't know, other types of, staying healthy and fit and energized?
Yeah, for sure. I think the best way to think about it is to maybe like draw a pyramid. So kind of like the food pyramid, except this will be based on things that would actually make you better and not industry money. So if you were to draw a pyramid, I think the base would be movement, right? So like what kind of just general, I think as creatures, as a species, we evolved to move, and that's pretty undeniable. So the first thing is to like figure out what your movement practice would be. And it might be running ultra marathons, it might be boxing, it might be yoga. As long as it's not the shake weight, I'm probably going to be okay with it. And,
yeah.
It's just, but figure out your movement practice. And honestly, I'm a big fan of kind of trying different things out. A lot of coaches and a lot of athletes will tell you to stay away from different fads, but I actually am the opposite of that. I think you should do them. I've done the ketogenic diet. I've done the paleo diet. And what you realize is when you start doing all these different things, they just become tools in your toolbox, and how to apply them and when to apply them. And it just gives you a better understanding of your own body. So the base of the pyramid, in my opinion, is movement. And then after that would be whole real food. That's always going to be a staple for me. I always, no matter what diet you try, if you stick to whole real food, you're going to be okay. I think the more modified we get in anything, the less fulfilled we'll get, or the less healthy, or however you want to kind of frame that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then sleep. And then the very final thing, and you could probably switch sleep and whole real food. You need them both, so it doesn't really matter. And then the last thing I think would be like the supplement use. So, I have a supplement company. I'm not a great supplement owner though, because I kind of tell people like once you have everything else in place, once your movement practice is in place and you're sleeping good and you're eating well, then maybe look at supplements to get that last 1 or 2%. But it's going to be marginal. It's not, these aren't performance enhancing drugs. I'm talking about like just over the counter supplements.
Right. So let me ask a few questions, on this pyramid. So let's start off with the nutrition. So you say the whole real, nutritious foods, but give me some examples. Like what is your diet like? What are you eating and what do you avoid?
I do eat a lot of fat. I think that's somewhere the standard American diet really, really dropped the ball.
Yeah.
I do eat a lot of fat. I mean, it's the basis for hormone production. So, if you're an endurance athlete or an athlete at all, you can really run into some hormonal issues when you run your system for a very long time, and you have that cortisol release for prolonged periods of time. So I do a lot of fat. I do a lot of coconut oil. I do the bulletproof coffee. And then other than that, I mean, I try to stick to, and I don't look at lean meats either. I'm okay with meat that has fat on it. Everybody kind of has their own thing. And just in general, I avoid refined sugar because when I did the ketogenic diet, it works for some people, it doesn't work for others. But one thing I found is the good thing about it is it makes you aware of how much sugar is actually in everything that we consume. Everything as far as like milk has sugar in it. There's meat that if you buy it packaged, it has sugar in it. So it just makes you aware. I try to stay away from that because you get enough of it in fruit and things like that. So the big thing I think where we really miss the boat on diet is not enough fat and too much sugar.
Yeah. It's sort of, I don't know when it started, maybe in the 80s, but the whole, labeling things as fat free and they're loaded up in sugars, but yeah, they have no fat. And that sort of is, the I guess it's almost like a brainwashing. Now we think it's like, oh, if it says fat free, it's healthy, but in fact, it's loaded up with sugar and it's quite the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, there's something to be said for metabolic flexibility too, which is your body's ability to upregulate fat burning and use that as energy. And so, this is actually something great for endurance athletes. It's like 2 weeks prior to a race, I always try to limit carbohydrate and sugar consumption, and I increase fat consumption to kind of get my body to even use these carbohydrates more efficiently. You might not want to become a full-on, ketosis, fat burner, Zach Bitter type, but you can definitely use it as a tool in your toolbox so that when you do eat the gummy bears at aid stations, you don't crash like just in a couple miles down the road.
Right. And so then let's continue up this pyramid. So you mentioned sleep. So everyone says it's super important for recovery and just general health, but help me understand sort of, how do you know you're getting enough sleep or too much sleep? I mean, in terms of the way you approach things and also, in life, you have kind of, a limited amount of resources, right? You've got work, you've got working out, you've got sleep, you've got your family, your friends, so when you're training for something like the Tahoe 200, at what point do you say sleep is more important than the training I'm doing because otherwise I'm not recovering?
Yeah, I've had to really evolve in my thinking on sleep. And I think especially when you're younger, I mean, within a lot of communities, not sleeping is a badge of honor. I mean, I can look back at some weeks where I literally trained more than I slept, especially when I was younger in the military. It was just a cool thing to do. It made you feel tough. But now I'm at the point where if my sleep isn't right, I mean, I literally will just skip my training session, just because I think that recovery piece is so important. And if you want to do this for a long time, you need to really consider all of the different factors of recovery, and sleep is definitely the biggest one. Everybody, as far as how much to get, I think everybody, you kind of know for you, like where you run optimally, because there are definitely people that can run on 5 hours and feel okay. And I'm just not one of those people.
Yeah, either am I. My wife is though. 4 to 5 hours, she's a machine. If I don't get 7 to 8, I'm a zombie.
Right. Yeah. And then I purposely do sleep deprivation training. But I think you can cycle it just like if you were to build a linear progression in any workout program. Of course, you add on more and more volume, and then you cycle off and you use another week or whatever to regenerate, just like I talked about adding mileage. I've actually found you can do that with sleep decently well as well. Also, so you can indoctrinate yourself or inoculate yourself to less sleep as long as you build in those recovery times to kind of like catch up, let your body recover. And it's good just to know how your body operates on no sleep, because I think a lot of people get surprised when they start hallucinating or they start feeling really bad. It's good to know where the wheels kind of feel like they're going to fall off, just so in the game time you're ready for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the most intimidating things about the 200-mile distance is that unless you've done it before, you don't truly know where your limit is, right? I mean, you're not going to go out there and practice a 60-hour training run. So it's like, do I need that 2-hour nap 30 hours, 40 hours into the race? I don't know. So it's sort of that unknown that it sounds like that's the thing that is a tough puzzle to crack. And so for you, I mean, what was your sleep strategy in Tahoe, and did it end up being the right one?
My sleep strategy. So I planned on sleeping when I felt like I should. I really didn't have a good strategy. I knew I didn't want to sleep more than 4 hours total. That was kind of my goal.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing with these is it takes a very little amount to sleep to kind of reset your body and start feeling okay again.
Yeah.
Courtney DeWalter, I'm not sure if you listened to her interview on Rogan, but
yeah, I did.
So she took that 1 minute nap and was completely good to go after that.
Yeah.
My problem is when my lungs filled up with fluid from the edema, and actually a few people got pulled from the race for this pulmonary edema, which I'm a medic in the military, so I knew to just stay away from the medical staff or they'd pull me because they heard me like gargling, kind of like the fluid in my voice. But the biggest problem is I couldn't sleep because every time I laid down, it felt like I was drowning. So I didn't sleep at all until I want to say it was maybe the third night I took like a 10-minute dirt nap, and it was amazing. All in all, I slept an hour and 15 minutes, and the hallucinations were pretty bad.
Yeah, I can imagine. So the final thing you mentioned was supplement use, and just briefly talk about kind of your philosophy there. I mean, what supplements would you? I know everyone's different, and everyone needs different things, of course, but just sort of some of the most common supplements to use, because there's so much out there, and there's so much information and misinformation. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, there is a lot of misinformation. I don't know about most common, but I'll tell you what I recommend. And I really think a big place that endurance athletes miss the boat is with creatine. I've had a lot of endurance athletes I have to explain, they don't want to take creatine because they're afraid of the weight gain. And it's been marketed in a way. It's almost been marketed as an alternative to steroids. I mean, it's ridiculous when you look at some of the marketing behind creatine. But what people fail to mention is it's the most studied supplement on the market. So we have more research on creatine monohydrate than any other supplement out on the market. And not only does it help with endurance, strength, and recovery, but it also helps with mental acuity. It's being studied in Alzheimer's because of its cognitive function benefits. And so I think number one, a good source of a creatine monohydrate with no fillers. You're not going to gain weight if you stay to 5 grams a day, and absorb it. Take it with hot liquid because it'll be more readily absorbed in your body. That's another place I think people miss it. They try to mix it up with juice and all this like insulin to try to get it in your cells. If you just mix it with hot liquid, you won't get any of the bloating as long as you use a nice pharmaceutical grade creatine, like a clean brand. And that's the number one thing that I think endurance athletes should literally treat creatine like a macro. I know that's probably counterintuitive to what a lot of people on the show or endurance athletes might recommend, but I've taken a step. I've looked at the studies, and I've talked to a lot of exercise physiologist docs, and they pretty much all agree with me.
We're almost out of time here, so I guess one final question. You mentioned the importance of a bucket list. So tell me what else is on yours. You've done Tahoe 200. You've done a bunch of other things. I mean, what is your kind of beacon now? What are you focused on from, I guess, an endurance perspective?
Okay, so I'll tell you 3 things. I haven't actually told anybody the middle one, but Sistina 100. I'm not sure if you've heard that race. It's 100 miles in Alaska of the Iditarod Trail.
Yeah.
So I'm going to run that in February. That's my next race.
Awesome.
I'm going to try to do Badwater. We'll see about that. I think it would be cool to do the coldest and the hottest race in the same year.
Yeah.
In North America. And then I've got a rowing challenge, which I just accepted, but I'm waiting on the military to kind of clear me to do it.
Okay. Yeah. Rowing is really, really difficult. So, hopefully if you get cleared, good luck. I'll be definitely tracking you, but I've only done some rowing indoors and I know how difficult it is. So,
yeah, I've done some rowing indoors as well, but this is a team asked me to be a part of it, and they're going to try to break the open ocean record from California to Hawaii. So that'll be a whole different animal we'll have to tackle.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I mean, if people are interested in, finding out about your book or any other information, I know you have a podcast as well. I mean, just where would they go to find out more?
The podcast is Lionheart Radio. The book is Burn Your Couch, as you mentioned. You can go to burnyourcouch.com, or just search it on Amazon. I'm not sure when this comes out, but it'll be live in the next week or two.
Awesome.
And then on Instagram, it's at RunLiftEvolve.
Awesome. Well, Rick, thank you again for your time and a lot of these tips and interesting information. And I'm excited to track you at these races coming up in 2018. Hopefully you'll do both the Alaska and Badwater. It would be an incredible double to do. So hopefully that works out.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for listening to the Intelligent Racer podcast. For more information on this and other episodes, please visit www.intelligentracer.com. Also, be sure to check us out on social media, and please review us on your podcast directory. Join us next time for another edition of the Intelligent Racer.